Hi, my name is Bill Marshall, and I'm the chair of the IEEE Region 3 Section Support Committee. I'm going to give you a kind of specialized introduction to IEEE. My target audience is the community of section chairs here in Region 3, and my goal is to prepare you for the upcoming annual Region 3 committee meeting to be held at Southeast Con in just a couple of weeks. So let me show you what my approach is going to be. Despite the animated start here, which was mostly for me to refresh my knowledge of the production tool I'm using, most of this presentation is going to be me calling up a sequence of static images that I have gathered or generated over the past couple of days. This is intended to mostly answer a request for a so-called IEEE 101, that is, a basic introduction of IEEE. Unfortunately, however, even a basic introduction could take a very long time and still not meet the needs that prompted the request in the first place. So I'm going to focus in on governance and where Region 3 section chairs fit into that. We will, at least initially, focus in on a sequence of 5 documents that begins with the Ieee Constitution and Bylaws, which are combined into one file. Then we'll look into the MGA Operations Manual, which will lead us to the Region 3 Bylaws, and then finally land us directly into the Region 3 Operations Manual. Now you might be thinking that sounds about as interesting as watching paint dry. I will try to avoid that. One way is that I will show how my section chair would fit into all of this by grounding this presentation to where I live. Magic will have occurred if these two paths link up in the center. In fact, while we're here, let's go ahead and pass through that lower path. I live in Smyrna, Georgia, a northwestern suburb of the metro Atlanta area, which is in the northern portion of the state of Georgia. More to the point, I live within the territory of the IEEE Atlanta section, which covers approximately the northern third of the state. Here in Region 3, the Atlanta section is one of 41 sections covering the southeastern United States and the island nation of Jamaica. Of course, Jamaica is not in the Gulf of Mexico, but it fits into a graphic like this better when it's placed somewhere near the center of the map. As we look through the governance documents, we're going to reach all the way back into the IEEE Bylaws and find that a section shall be the basic operation geographical unit of IEEE. The emphasis is mine to remind us that a section is the primary touch point between IEEE and most members. We will also find in that same foundational document that a region shall be a geographical organizational unit of IEEE for management and administrative purposes to represent and fulfill the missions of IEEE within the territory prescribed. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves here by digging into the bylaws now, but we're doing so to declare that most of this presentation will be about the relationship between these two kinds of geographical units. In our case, between Region 3 and your section. With that introduction behind us, let's begin to step through the first 2 of those 5 governing documents. There are 2 reasons for doing this. The first one is that we'll see that the 5 documents are a sequence of declarations from the very general to the more specific on what IEEE is and how it does what it does. Going through that sequence will give us a sense of what the region-section relationship is, or prescribed to be, here in Region 3. The second reason is that by starting at the beginning, we can remind ourselves of what the endeavor is that we're all signed up to support as IEEE volunteers. I have found that sometimes we volunteers can become so narrowly focused on our current role and how it relates to other parts of IEEE that we lose sight of the big picture. Let's begin by looking at the Ieee Constitution, which is a mere 7-page document, including the cover page. Now, I found this document by Googling Ieee Constitution and Bylaws, which you can too. This is a good time to comment that a true IEEE 101 would probably venture into the history of IEEE, which you can find by Googling IEEE history. But we just don't have time for that. Back to the Ieee Constitution. We see that IEEE has 2 primary purposes. One is scientific and educational, directed toward the advancement of the theory and practice of a number of fields. The second is professional, directed toward the advancement of the standing of the members of the professions it serves. And we note that along the way the desired outcome is that IEEE shall strive to enhance the quality of life for all people throughout the world. So Article 1, Section 2 reminds us of who we are and what we are trying to accomplish. If we move on to the next sheet, we see first that this Constitution calls for a set of bylaws to prescribe how this Constitution is to be executed. The second thing I want to point out on this page is that even in this foundational document, the execution of IEEE's purpose will primarily be pursued from two perspectives, geographical and technical. Finally, let's look at one more page in this document, where we will note first that the IEEE Board of Directors shall be the governing body of the IEEE. And then further down, we will see that the board may create committees or major boards. Much of the structure and operation of IEEE is set up to remain compliant with New York State requirements here in the United States, where IEEE is incorporated. With that, I think I've pointed out everything I wanted to in the IEEE Constitution. Now that wasn't too bad, was it? Now that we just looked at the selected portions of the IEEE Constitution, we can move on to the IEEE Bylaws, which we saw were just prescribed in the Constitution. This document, including a 6-page table of contents, is 70 pages long, which is quite an expansion. Now don't worry, we'll only look at a few of them. Let's start by jumping ahead to page 29 to get further clarification on why I'm taking us through this succession of documents. On this page, we see a sequence of statements. First, the IEEE Certificate of Incorporation legally establishes IEEE. Next, the IEEE Constitution contains IEEE's fundamental objectives and organization. Third, implementation of the constitutional provisions by specific organizational units is contained in these bylaws, that is, this document. Fourth, the precedents of these documents should be remembered by all those engaged in IEEE management duties. And then finally, additional documents governing organizational units such as operations manuals, policy statements, and organizational unit bylaws shall conform to and not conflict with the provisions of the IEEE governing documents. Now, having stepped you through this page, hopefully you understand why we're proceeding through these 5 documents. It may be a little tedious, though I'm trying to avoid that as much as possible. But think of it this way. These documents are building a multi-level structure of governance, with each level built on the foundation of its predecessors. The stronger that each foundational level is, the stronger the overall structure will be. Okay, with that behind us, let's go back to page 14. We went first to page 29 just to build a bridge between the documents we're diving into, especially these first 2. I'm backtracking now to section 107 here on page 14 because I want to present some organizational definitions or requirements within IEEE. Paragraph 1 specifies that activities within IEEE are carried out by organizational units, or OUs. It doesn't take long as a volunteer before we start hearing about OUs and how they're related to each other. We see in paragraphs 2 and 5 that all OUs are organized into a single hierarchy with the IEEE Board of Directors at the top. Paragraphs 3 and 4 address how one becomes part of an OU and permits membership to be fee-based. Finally, paragraph 6, interestingly, specifies that any Board of Governors for any OU within IEEE shall be deemed a committee. Preview, the Region 3 Committee is the Board of Governors for the region. We're going to move on to page 37 and present one more thing before narrowing our focus down to geographic activities. The first sentence in paragraph 1 of section 3.3 again directs that wherever possible, activities of IEEE should be organized either by geography or technical interest. But the paragraph goes on to acknowledge that some activities don't fit neatly into these two. So additional major boards exist to carry out some of the important work of IEEE. In fact, paragraph 2 lists all 6 major boards. To some IEEE members, or to other non-member members of our profession, and even to the general public, their primary or only knowledge of or contact with IEEE is through the work of the other 4 boards. By the way, before we move on, there in the center of paragraph 1, we see, again, the clarification that all 6 major boards are deemed committees of IEEE. We're going to be zipping our way to the end of these IEEE bylaws now, with one stop along the way. Here on page 39, the Membership and Geographic Activities Board is defined. This is a definition that has only been anticipated at this point. It provides that the MGA Board is responsible to the IEEE Board and has the task of maintaining, enhancing, and supporting the geographic units of IEEE, along with being responsible for IEEE membership and member development. And now we come to the last 2 important pages in these IEEE bylaws, at least for our purposes. Pages 68 and 69 define the various geographic units in IEEE. As we just saw, the assignment of the MGA Board is to maintain, enhance, and support these units. Before we look into the definitions of these OUs, let's pause and explore the list of 10 regions and their territory. Now, I have to say, I haven't yet found a sentence in this document that says something like there shall be 10 regions. There are occasionally references to the 10 regions, and earlier in this document there was another list of the 10 regions as it was presenting how much each region added to member dues. In fact, I have to say that this document isn't really organized in a serial manner, where, for example, nothing is referenced until it is defined. Well, that's my impression anyway. These 10 regions have short descriptions of their territory, and we can see that our Region 3, as noted at the beginning, is comprised of the southeastern United States of America and the island of Jamaica. Since a picture paints 1,000 words, let's look at a map that I Googled and found on an IEEE website. This is who we are. IEEE.org says that we are over 396,000 members in more than 160 countries, more than 60% of our membership being outside the United States. Among these 10 regions, there are 342 sections. Some of you have recently noted that you are aware that there is a realignment of these 10 regions being developed to bring the region territory distributions more in line with the distribution of membership around the world. That is true, but the realignment hasn't been set yet, and its implementation is still some years away. For now, with these region boundaries set where they currently are, let's look at a map of just regions 1 through 6, which again I Googled to find and pulled this one from somewhere on an IEEE website. Again, Jamaica isn't where it's supposed to be, and it looks like this map kind of fudges the northern boundary of Region 3. They're around Kentucky and western Tennessee. But this gives a good general sense of the territories that regions 1 through 6 cover. With that fun little aside behind us, looking at those 2 maps, we can return to the geographical OU definitions found here in the IEEE bylaws. Within paragraph 1, we find that a region shall be a geographic organizational unit for management and administrative purposes to represent, fulfill the missions of IEEE. We find within paragraph 2 that areas may be established by a region to fulfill the communication needs and the management and administrative missions of the region. So we see that areas are just geographically focused extensions of a region. They work on behalf of the region. We find within paragraph 4, see, you can't really read this document serially, that a section shall be the basic operating geographic unit of IEEE. You see, regions and sections are separately defined, but the functional relationship between them is not yet specified. We can safely infer that a region territory includes the territories of one or more whole sections, but we'll have to wait on clarification for the rest. At any rate, now that we at least have a definition of a section, we can begin to look at subunits of sections, and we'll begin by going back to paragraph 3. Here, we find the Geographic Council may be formed by agreement of a group of contiguous sections, and exists at their pleasure. Later, it clarifies that the sections retain their recognition as the basic operating, executive, administrative, and geographic unit of IEEE. So just as we found the regions and areas, we have a functional relationship defined here. That is, areas help regions do region things, and geographic councils help sections do section things. Then, paragraphs 5 through 11 go on to define various subunits of sections or councils, but we won't focus on those at this time. And we're now done looking through the IEEE bylaws. You see, already the geographic structure of IEEE is set here in this fundamental governance document of IEEE. For more definition on what those geographic organizational units do and how they do it, we'll move on to the MGA Operations Manual. I was able to find the MGA Operations Manual by Googling it, which you can do as well. This is a 127-page document, which is even larger than the IEEE bylaws. But again, we'll only look at some of the pages. Specifically, we'll be looking into Section 9. We'll start on page 71, which is the beginning of Section 9. We see in paragraph A that the MGA Board shall develop policies related to IEEE programs of the geographic OUs, and that guidelines for all of those OUs shall be contained here. We see in paragraph B that generally the MGA Board shall be responsible for developing its own plans, schedules, and procedures, though of course to the extent delegated by the IEEE Board. We also see that the geographic OUs shall operate in support of their geographic area as provided in their respective bylaws. The emphasis there is mine. Finally, in paragraph C, we observe that the MGA Board shall be responsible for essentially ensuring that the OUs operate in a compliant manner to all of the preceding governing documents. This is why we spent so much time looking at those preceding documents. Now we move on to page 75, where in section 9.1, paragraph A, we get a definition of an IEEE region, which is pretty much what we've seen before. For us, this page isn't too exciting, so let's quickly move on to page 76. Here on page 76, in paragraph C, we get a list of the minimum requirements of a region. Items 1 through 3 are about region governance. Item 4 prescribes that a region should plan and implement programs to meet the needs of IEEE members in the region. One way to do this, of course, is to support the local OUs in their programs. But we know that Region 3 also engages members directly. And then item 5 explicitly directs regions to develop and implement training programs for volunteers and members for their development. We're now going to move down to paragraph F, where we see that a region committee is explicitly identified as the Board of Governors for that region. Now we're going to move on to page 77, and we're going to spend some time on this page because the material here is directly relevant to the upcoming Region 3 committee meeting at Southeast Con. Near the top, we get some requirements concerning the prescribed membership of a region committee. In particular, paragraph 3 mandates that a region committee shall consist of the 5 specified officers, each section chair, plus the region's professional activities coordinator and the region's student activities chair. Here in Region 3, with 41 sections, that establishes a base region committee of 48 persons. Then, merging paragraphs 3aii and 3bi, we see that additional voting members may be added to the region committee, but those additional voting members may not exceed 1/4 of the base membership of the committee. Thus, for Region 3, we see that up to 12 additional voting members may be added. That is the first of two important sections for us on this page. I just remembered. I want to make one additional comment before I proceed. Here in Region 3, with a total of up to 60 permitted members on the Region Committee, and with 41 of them being section chairs, those section chairs are the supermajority voice in the oversight of Region 3. Okay, now we can move on. Down in paragraph 6, it establishes that a Region Committee, and remember the Region Committee is the region's Board of Governors, may establish an Executive Committee, or EXCOM, to act on its behalf between the meetings of the Region Committee. In fact, paragraph 6a clarifies that every decision or action of the EXCOM is reversible by the Region Committee, so we see the explicit required deference of the EXCOM to the committee. Then, paragraph 6b gives a Region Committee the full reign on determining the composition of its EXCOM. There are several pages that present requirements on region operations. We're going to skip most of those here, but we'll stop on page 80. In paragraph M, we see that the MGA Operations Manual requires that a Region Committee must meet at least one time per year. Here in Region 3, that meeting generally occurs at SoutheastCon. Now let's move on to the next page, 81. In section 9.2, we again see areas defined, but there's not much here. Areas don't have budgets, they don't have elections, they don't have independent operations specific to the area. In fact, it appears that an area isn't even a proper OU as defined by IEEE. Areas do have prescribed territories, but the appointment of the area chairs is by the region director. Then, section 9.3 defines geographic councils as subordinate OUs to sections. Again, before sections are defined in this document later. There are several pages on geographic council governance because they are proper OUs, but we'll skip them here. There is a subsequent section of this document that defines an IEEE section OU. Did you hear that? There's a section that defines a section. But except for details about section governance and administrative operations, there's not a lot new here that we haven't already seen. So we're going to go ahead and leave the MGA Operations Manual. I want to pause and recall what we have discovered so far. We'll start with IEEE, which I'm not quite sure how to represent. I guess let's start with a cloud with a dotted boundary, and let the interior of the cloud represent what IEEE is, whatever that means. From an MGA perspective, perhaps we could think of the interior of the cloud as our members, but other parts of IEEE can lay claim to part of it too. We looked at 3 of the 5 governance documents, which so far describe who we are, what we do, where we come from, legally that is, and how we operate. They defined the board of directors of IEEE. They then prescribed that there would be a group of committees. Remember, every subunit to the board is a committee, called the major boards of IEEE, one of them being the Member and Geographic Activities Board. The MGA board was to develop a structure of 10 regions, each of them covering the territories of multiple sections. The regions themselves were managed by their own region committee, or board of governors. Let me point out that all of the arrows are bidirectional. This isn't a reporting chain of command per se. Instead, this is a collaboration matrix, one that is not without accountability, but one that describes the channels of communication and the breaking up of operational responsibilities. To this, we can add the notion of region areas, which subdivide region territories to support the region's interaction with the sections. The documents make clear that areas are optional and fully controlled by the region, and in most respects, the region's director. We can add one more thing to this, and that is the notion of geographic councils, which are subunits of 2 or more contiguous sections, to help those sections manage their section-to-section collaborations. With this reminder behind us, we can now proceed into the Region 3 governance documents. Now we are ready to proceed into the Region 3 bylaws,
which is only a 10-page document, including a 2-page title and table of contents.
We'll begin, quite naturally, by looking at the first body page of the document, which is page 3. Sections 1 and 3 establish the bridge between this document and all the preceding documents, and reiterate that in the sequence of governance documents, that a preceding one will always supersede a succeeding one in the event of a conflict. We're going to move on to page 4 now and come to a kind of screeching halt at sections 5 and 6. These Region 3 bylaws reveal that at some time in the past, Region 3 decided to establish a linkage between area territories and council territories, and area chairs and council chairs. We'll pull those sections out and then move on to page 7, which contains another reference to the area council linkage. We'll set that aside also. Let's consider this linkage. Recall that a section is a more narrowly focused MGAOU than a region. A region contains a whole number of multiple sections. Their mission is essentially the same, bringing IEEE to geographic territories, especially the members in them. They do play different roles because of the different scales of their territories, and their relations to other parts of the Geographic OU collaboration chain are different. There are 2 places that the documents that we've reviewed so far create or specify subordinate relationships in the collaboration chain. That is between regions and areas, and between sections and councils. What this area council linkage has done is to create a kind of short circuit across the collaboration chain. The motivation behind this is not documented in these bylaws, but that historical linkage is now being questioned. This linkage does appear to be inconsistent with the intent of region section operations as specified in the MGA Operations Manual, except to the extent that the MGA Operations Manual does seem to defer implementation specifics to each OU's own bylaws. As a practical matter, this linkage requires that areas contain whole numbers of councils, as shown in this graphic now. Well, actually, the requirement is that where there are councils, the region is mandated to assign exactly one area to each council. So this graphic isn't really quite right. One of the changes being considered at the upcoming Region Committee meeting at Southeast Con is to decouple the areas and councils, so as to restore to the region its privileges to assign area boundaries and appoint area chairs. I will report a kind of hearsay to you section chairs who are preparing for that meeting. It is my understanding that with varying levels of evidence to support it, that a long succession of region directors, all or almost all of them, have found the current area structure to be of little or no benefit to them for fulfilling the region's missions across Region 3. I leave it to the proposers of the changes to more fully describe those changes and to further make the case for them. We have one more thing to address before we kind of jump ahead to bring this video to an abbreviated end. Let's return to page 4 of the Region 3 bylaws and focus in now on Section 3. Section 3 of the Region 3 bylaws lists the voting members of the Region 3 committee. It includes the 5 officers, the 41 section chairs, and the chairs of the student activities and professional activities committees, all as mandated in the MGA Operations Manual. Recall, though, that the MGA Operations Manual permits an additional 1/4 of the number in this core set to be added to the set of voting members, which in our case here in Region 3 is 12. Now, Section 3 of these bylaws requires that the first set of those open slots be filled with the area chairs. We haven't yet encountered where that number is specified, but trust me when I report to you that it's 9. Most of you probably know that to be true. That leaves 3 remaining voting slots on the Region 3 committee. Here, they are set to the chair of the Conference Committee, the chair of the Strategic Operations and Support Committee, and the chair of the Section Support Committee. At the upcoming Region 3 committee meeting at Southeast Con, either a second proposal, or maybe a second part of the same proposal, I'm not sure, is to, once the areas and councils are presumably decoupled, reduce the number of areas and thus the number of area chairs in Region 3. I believe the reduction is down to 6. This reduction has the benefit of freeing up 3 more voting slots in the Region 3 committee for, presumably, additional XCOM committee chairs. We're going to forego going into the 5th governance document, the Region 3 Operations Manual, because of time. As mentioned at the beginning, this video was in response to a request for a kind of IEEE 101, but that request was prompted by a need to prepare section chairs for Southeast Con, which by this time in the video production process is just days away. I hope you find this useful. Perhaps I'll have a reason and an opportunity to refine it in the future.